want to start out the sermon with a story. And as I tell the story, there's some of you that maybe relate to this, or you may know of someone who can relate to this today. So, an exhausted young mother dragged herself to the telephone when it rang. On the other end of the line was a very kind voice. "How are you, sweetheart? What kind of day are you having?" "Oh, mother," said the woman, "I'm having such a bad day. The baby won't eat. The washing machine broke down. The house is a mess. We're having 2 couples over for dinner tonight, and I haven't even a chance to go shopping yet. And to top it off, I just sprained my ankle." The mother was just overwhelmed with sympathy. "Oh, honey," she said, "sit down, relax, just close your eyes. I'll be over in a half an hour. I'll do the shopping, I'll clean the house, I'll cook dinner for you. I'll feed the baby, and I'll call a repairman to get the washing machine fixed. Now, stop crying. I'll do everything. In fact, I'll even call Sean at the office and ask him to come home and help out." "Sean," said the housewife. "Who's Sean?" Why, your husband, of course." "You mean Jim, don't you? You'll call Jim at the store? Isn't this Julie?" "No, this is Lindsay." "Oh, I am so sorry. I must have dialed the wrong number. I am so sorry." There was a long silence. Then the young woman said, "Does this mean you're not coming over?" So often in our lives, we feel so besieged like this, don't we? Surrounded by struggles, by adversities, by challenges, by pressures, sicknesses, ailments, anxieties, stress. Things just aren't going right. We feel hemmed in. We feel trapped. Demands are everywhere. Everywhere we turn, there are demands on us. And this is not just a modern day phenomenon. Let's hear from Psalm 22 again. Let's hear what the psalmist says about this. "Many bulls surround me. Mighty bulls from Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths at me like a lion, ripping and roaring. I'm poured out like water." The sermon today is not part of a sermon series. We ended the sermon series a couple of weeks ago on doubt, and next week we're starting a new sermon series. So this is what's called a standalone sermon. I get to pick my own. So basically, by the time I was looking for inspiration for what I was going to preach on today, I came across Psalm 22, the scripture for today. And I read about the bulls of Bashan. I had no idea who they were, or what they symbolized, or what they were doing in the Bible. I didn't know where Bashan was. So I wondered, I bet you I could fashion a sermon about the bulls of Bashan. So not one to ever shy away from a challenge, even if it's from myself. Here's my sermon on the bulls of Bashan. So here's my endeavor to preach on them. See, Bashan, I found out, was a region of ancient Israel that's kind of a little northeast of the Sea of Galilee, in what is today southern Syria. And one thing it was known for was cattle. Cattle was raised there. And during certain times of the year, the cattle were just allowed to graze in free-range fashion. In some of the more densely populated areas, there were herdsmen that might be employed to make sure the animals didn't harm anyone. But out in the countryside, they were just able to roam free. And some of the beasts took on the behavior of wild animals. Wow, there they are. They are menacing. Consequently, it was possible that some unfortunate person near Bashan might suddenly find himself surrounded by bulls, angry bulls, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. And the potential for the animal to inflict serious bodily harm was quite real and quite scary. They were actually, the bulls of Bashan was actually a scary situation for the people in those times, the folks in those days, a predicament for which they could not get away from or ignore. So we could look at the bulls of Bashan as kind of a metaphor for us. We rarely find ourselves in the midst of wild animals, yet we do find ourselves in the midst of chaos, in the midst of pressures we can't ignore, quandaries we can't get out of, duties we cannot shirk, responsibilities we cannot evade. We are surrounded by them, and we feel like we are under besiege. We all have, as the cliche says, a lot on our plate these days. Maybe that's the curse of our modern world. Just think about it. All these labor-saving devices and information at our fingertips has really kind of increased dramatically our daily activities. We have so much to concern ourselves with these days. Just think about it. So many things to concern ourselves with: our health, our finances, our relationships, our emotional well-being, our spiritual well-being. We got to nurture and foster our family relationship. We want to get involved with worthwhile organizations and causes to live life fully. Then there's just the day-to-day activities we've got to involve ourselves with, the grocery visits, the doctor's appointments, the car repairs, our work life, upkeep on the house and the yard. And if you have young family, then there's the baseball practices and the volleyball practices and the games and the swim meets and the band and orchestra concerts and the more chorus musicals. And God forbid somebody gets sick. That puts a ringer in everything. And finally, we need some chill time too, don't we? We got to binge watch all those shows we love, our favorites. Got to keep up with our sports teams. Go Rays. So, got to check our Facebook and Instagram contacts. Got to catch up with the books we're reading. We need to go on walks for exercise and relaxation. Oh yes, and every once in a while we need to get some sleep too, don't we? We need to get some sleep. And for most of it, we just don't get enough sleep. There's too much going on. We get sleep and then wake up and start everything all over again. Experts and pundits will tell us that we need to get control and manage all these tasks by setting boundaries, by saying no when we must, and prioritizing our activities. That seems such a simple thing to do, but a very hard thing to do, very difficult. It only helps so far. There's still those duties, those responsibilities, those tasks, those pressure situations that we can't ignore or wish them away. They're going to be around us, whether we like it or not. They're ever present, glaring at us menacingly, like the bulls of Bashan. We can't get around them. Oh, they're still up there. So I can't get away from them. And then there's a reality as Christians. We're here to bear each other's burdens, help others in need, take care of our neighbors, look out for the homeless and the hungry, be a listening ear, be a compassionate heart for someone who is hurting or despairing. So as Christians, our plates are even more saturated with all the Christian concerns we have to do in our lives. To give you an example, and this may resonate with some of you, or maybe all of you, of what it is that has so many things going on in the plate, how it is in our modern day society, of all the demands that are on us. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named Josh. Josh isn't wealthy, but he makes a decent living. He pays his bills on time. He's a good guy, has some savings. He isn't in any financial difficulty himself, but he has a brother-in-law who can't seem to manage his money well and is always in financial need. We all got relatives like that, don't we? Josh loves his brother-in-law and has a hard time saying no when from time to time he taps him for a loan, which he never pays back. And Josh feels for his brother-in-law, and though he'd rather not, he usually ends up helping him. And Josh is a law-abiding citizen himself, but his friend from high school has gotten into some trouble and is now in prison. His friend's family won't have anything to do with him. So the friend reaches out to Josh, asking him to visit, asking him for help with some needs, and Josh does what he can. But each time he visits his friend, he comes away feeling really, really depressed. He dreads receiving a letter from the imprisoned friend because each time he knows what's going to happen. His friend is asking him to do something for him. Often things that kind of push him out of his comfort zone, like talking to a judge on the friend's behalf. Josh is in good health himself, but his widower father isn't. And because Josh is an only child, he spends a lot of time taking care of his father, making sure he gets to his doctor's appointments, getting his groceries, checking in on him, and so forth. Josh's wife, they have children. They're grown children who have their own children, but often they're called to look after their grandchildren. And they love their grandchildren, but their kids often think that mom and dad don't have anything else to do but to babysit them. They don't seem to consider what else they may have going on in their lives. While Josh's own life is even keel, he's being pulled one way and another by the demands that others are placing on him. And frankly, it exhausts him. Some of you feel that way too? Then one Sunday, Josh goes to church and hears a sermon in which the pastor says that everyone should be doing more to fulfill God's command to help the neighbors in need. Love your neighbor. Josh found himself thinking that if he had any more neighbors to love, it would be the death of him. In fact, Josh felt like he was surrounded by people with their hands extended, saying, help me, feed me, care for me, be my advocate, lead me, guide me, do this for me, do that for me. Does Josh sound like anybody you know? Does Josh sound like your life? Maybe you could share some similar stories in your life. Well, some would say, and maybe I'd be one of them, say, well, Josh just simply needs to learn to say no, set his boundaries. But that's not really a solution. Which one of those do you think you would tell him to ignore? Which one would you say he should ignore? And he wants to be the sort of person who could be counted on, who doesn't turn away from those who are in need. He takes seriously the biblical command to love your neighbor. It isn't so much that he wants to get out of these responsibilities, but only that he wishes he had more time and effort to adequately support them and still have a little time for himself. This is where many of us find ourselves, don't we? Trapped everywhere we turn, looking down those nostrils over those bulls of Bashan, and sometimes feeling like we're gored by those bulls. Do you hear the roar of the bulls in your life surrounding you? Okay, now you're probably thinking that I'm going to come up here and go, okay, here's the 3 simple answers to this solution, to this problem. Here they are. Well, there aren't any easy answers, as I could say. When one is a Christian, when they put their trust in God, we may have this feeling that everything's going to go smoother. Life will be a lot easier. Life will be free of pressure, stress, anxieties, demands from others. That's not the case, I'm sorry to say. Not the case. Our lives will be continued to be besieged by the needs of the world and others around us. We know that there will always be plenty of people who need our help, and as Christians, we feel guilty if we don't help them. So there's another thing to add to our list of stresses: guilt. Guilt. The roar of the bulls of Bashan gets louder and louder. We may come away from all this thinking, there's something wrong with me. Why am I so overwhelmed? Why can't I handle everything? Why are there so many demands on me? Why am I not reaching out to those in need, loving my neighbors and my enemies as Jesus commands? Yet we must accept the reality that this is life. This is life. Living as imperfect people in an imperfect world. There will always be demands and challenges surrounding us that we can't get away from. One of my favorite series is a series called Band of Brothers, HBO series, award-winning series that chronicle the true exploits of Company E, 2nd Battalion, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, and the 101st Airborne Division during World War II. At one point, they found themselves in the woods in the forest of Bastion, France, without air or artillery support. They were stranded. They lacked food, ammunition, and even winter clothes. Another officer was lamenting to Major Richard Winters, the commander of Company E, saying that they're hopelessly surrounded by German panzer divisions. Winters calmly yet confidently assured the man, "Lieutenant, we're paratroopers. We're supposed to be surrounded." And maybe we could say that about our lives, that living in the imperfect world, we're supposed to be surrounded by demands. It's normal to be besieged and surrounded by the demands of life. Okay, so I don't want to leave you on this dismal note, but let's go back to the Psalms, verse 11 of the Psalm, where the psalmist prays to God, "Please don't be far from me because trouble is near." Please don't be far from me, God. The psalmist was quite aware of the close proximity of the demands on his life. That's when the bulls are the most dangerous, of course, when they're right beside you, breathing down your neck. What the psalmist prays for himself is not for God to make the bulls go away, but only for God to be as close to him as they are. Or to put in words that we might pray, be as near to me as my troubles are. Be as near to me as my troubles are. In most of our circumstances, shooing away the menacing bulls, it's not an option. We can't do that. But if we can sense that God is as close to us as the demands are on us, we have that additional source of energy for dealing with them. Or as Philip Brooks, a noted preacher from the 19th century, put it, I do not pray for a lighter load, but for a stronger back. Finally, I want to end in another source of comfort and strength from the 22nd Psalm. If you read further on in the passage and see if these words, you recognize these words in verses 16 through 18. Dogs surround me, a pack of evil men circle me like a lion. Oh, my poor hands and feet, I can count all my bones. Meanwhile, they just stare at me, watching me. They divvy up my garment among themselves. They cast lots for my clothes. Why do these words ring so familiar? They sound like the cry of someone dying, hanging on a cross, as people stare at him, his broken hands and feet. And if you look back to the opening line of Psalm 22, it says, we read, sorry, I got ahead of it. As we read in Matthew 27, 35 through 36, this is the narrative of Christ on the cross. And when they crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Exactly what the person in Psalm 22 was crying about. In fact, the opening words of the 22nd Psalm says, my God, why have you forsaken me? The very words of Jesus on the cross. Jesus felt besieged, and he echoed these words of the 22nd Psalm. He, in essence, echoed a prayer to God of how he felt forsaken. Jesus knew that his Father was near to him, and near to him as a prayer. So he lifted up a prayer to his Father. He needed to know that his Father was closer to him than the turmoil that was staring him in his face now. He needed to see the face of the Father and not the faces of the bulls that were looming menacingly, so that he could echo these words of verse 24 of this psalm. Because he didn't despise or detest the suffering of the one who suffered, he didn't hide his face from me, meaning God. No, he listened when I cried to him for help. God will listen to our cry. So in times of constant chaos and unrest, we need to see God and not the turmoil and everything that's around us. We need to see the face of God. And we could do that, see that God is nearby. And the best way we can do that is through prayer. God is only a prayer away from us. We encounter the living God through prayer, so that we can see more clearly that the Lord is in our midst, even when we struggle to disperse the mayhem in our lives, and sometimes we can't. The mayhem that may always be with us, always surrounding us. Yet in those times, we are assured that God is with us. God is near. Praise be to God who gives us his mercy and his grace and his peace.